Hello, and welcome to this poster session for the Division of Learning Disabilities Student Poster Session at the Council for Exceptional Children Conference. We appreciate you taking the time to view our poster session. Thank you so much for coming out. My name is Kelly Acosta, and I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Florida, studying teacher education and special education. And my colleague and co-researcher on this project is Eilish Thompson, a master's student at Johns Hopkins University. And our plan is to actually submit this paper that this poster is on to the for publication to the Learning Disabilities Research. So to begin, just a little bit of background about this poster and why we embarked on this research. First, adolescents with learning disabilities unfortunately continue to still struggle with reading comprehension. When assessed on the last national educational assessment, Assessment of Education for Progress, or as called NAEP, students in grades 8 and 12 with disabilities continue to score below basic level on reading, which means these students only have partial mastery of the knowledge and skills required to read grade level and comprehend grade level texts. In addition, we also wanted to know which reading comprehension interventions work best for students with learning disabilities, for older students with learning disabilities, because as students advance through the grades and as they age, texts become more complex in nature and more challenging. And then also, the last time a comprehensive review was completed on reading comprehension interventions that included older students was over 10 years ago. So more updated information is needed. So the purpose of our research was to provide researchers and practitioners with updated information on research-based reading comprehension instructional approaches for adolescents with learning disabilities. And our research question was, which interventions improve reading comprehension outcomes for students with learning disabilities in grades 6 through 12? So to conduct our study, we used the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analyses, or commonly known as PRISMA standards. We searched in the following databases: ERIC, PsycInfo, Education Index Retrospective, Professional Development Collection, Psychology and Behavioral Sciences Collection, and Teacher Reference Center. We used a variety of search terms and combinations of these search terms. And we searched the databases from 1917 all the way through July of 2020. And 1917 was chosen because that was the earliest date available within the database. So we tried to be comprehensive in our search. And the inclusion criteria for our search was that studies had to be either random controlled trialed or quasi-experimental, and they had to have been peer reviewed. We did not include dissertations. They must have included some sort of reading comprehension measure or outcome on reading comprehension. Had to include students in grades 6 through 12 or ages 12 through 18, or information on these students were disaggregated. In addition, studies need to include students with learning disabilities. At least 50% of the students in their sample had to have a learning disability, or information in the study was disaggregated, or students in the sample scored below the 25th percentile in reading. And then information on effect sizes or means and standard deviations needed to be included in the studies as well. So here's our PRISMA flow diagram that shows our process for determining our final sample. We started out with 3,346 articles from our initial search, and then found additional sources, additional articles from doing backwards and forward searches from reference lists from previous syntheses and meta-analyses conducted. After looking through titles and abstracts, removing duplicates, we were left with a final pool of 129 articles, and then applying our inclusion and exclusion criteria, we had a final sample of 24 articles. And the reason for many of these studies being excluded was that they were either not experimental or quasi-experimental studies, or information was not disaggregated for age, grade, or disability status. And then there were also quite a few dissertations that we did not include. So here are our findings for our 24 studies. These are the characteristics of these studies. As you can see here, most studies were conducted on students in middle school or grades 6, 7, and 8. Only 4 studies included students that were in high school. And then one additional study was conducted on incoming ninth that were included in these studies was a mix of expository and narrative, with most studies actually using expository type texts. And then the type of classes that these studies were conducted in was mostly either English language arts or actually science courses. And then some were conducted in history or social studies courses. And then there were a few that didn't report on the type of course where the intervention was implemented. Session durations were actually very short and limited, with a wide range, with either being at least a minimum of 3 sessions or 3 days, to a length of 20 sessions or 25 sessions. And there were 2 sessions that were longer in duration. One was by Darsh and Gersten, and another one, was by Calhoun. That was 31 weeks. And then the other one was by O'Connor and colleagues, and that was about a school year. And then we categorized studies based upon the type of intervention that the researchers implemented. And we categorized them either by a strategy that the researchers used, computer-assisted learning, peer-assisted learning strategies, or vocabulary and phonics instruction, or some sort of multi-component instruction, which included a variety of either usually strategies with vocabulary or phonics instruction. So effect sizes on these studies ranged and varied greatly, very widely. The largest effect size on one of these studies was Barth and Ellerman at 7.64 to a range of very small with Boyle at 0.06. So it was very challenging to determine which interventions were most effective in supporting the needs of older reading comprehension needs of older students, because the effect sizes varied so greatly. Despite this, it appears that from this, most strategies that were effective were those that include some sort of summarization or strategy, actually, some sort of strategy provided to attack reading comprehension. So to summarize our study, interventions assessed through standardized assessments actually were generally found to have lower effect sizes, and interventions implemented by teachers also had lower effect sizes. Those implemented by researchers and assessed through researcher-developed assessments had larger effect sizes. And then overall, effect sizes vary greatly, with strategy interventions having the largest effects. So some limitations of the studies that were included in our review was that there was varied use of reporting methods and study quality. This varied greatly. A lot of times, what was most challenging was that researchers did not clearly describe the interventions they implemented. So it was challenging to understand how these interventions were implemented. And this is important to know, because if you want to replicate the study, or if you're a teacher and you want to implement this type of strategy in your class, it will be difficult to be able to understand how to use this strategy if it wasn't clearly identified within the research article. Also, most studies were conducted on middle school students, and only very few were conducted on high school students. And then finally, a review of a limitation of our systematic review is that even though we attempted to do a comprehensive search and find all the articles we could conducted on reading comprehension for students with learning disabilities in secondary grades, we still could potentially be missing some studies out there. So some implications for future research is that, again, more quality research needs to be completed on reading comprehension interventions for especially high school students. There were very few research studies conducted in high school settings. I personally think this is important because as students get older, texts increase in complexity, and thus we need to know what's going to work for these older students. Take elective courses, such in career and technical education, is also needed to understand how to support these students with career and college readiness in post-secondary settings. Also, more long-term research is needed. Most of these interventions conducted were short in duration, and because older students, their progress in reading is often slow and incremental, longer duration studies are needed to see what will impact their reading comprehension. And finally, some implications for practice is that as a teacher, based on this systematic review, I would recommend for instructors that even though it was difficult to determine which interventions had the most impact on older struggling readers, almost every study in here described providing the intervention using systematic and explicit instruction. So I would recommend that anyone providing some sort of instruction on reading comprehension, especially for older students who struggle, that the instruction should be explicit, systematic, and include lots of modeling. And if you want to look at our references list, you can scan that QR code. Any recommendations, questions, comments, feedback is always welcome. You can contact me, Kelly Acosta, and my information is listed on the slide, kacosta@ufl.edu. Thank you so much for listening to our poster session. We greatly appreciate it, and we hope you enjoyed the conference. Thanks.